In 1895, the case of Bridget Cleary, a young Irish woman from rural County Tipperary, horrified and shocked the world. Newspapers labelled her the last witch burned in Ireland, a phrase that has stuck for over a century. But to call her a witch obscures a more complicated story. Bridget's murder sits at the intersection of folklore, gender, and violence. Was she killed because her community truly believed she had been replaced by a fairy changeling? Or did superstition simply provide cover for a jealous husband seeking to control a wife who refused to conform? This case offers a fascinating glimpse into late 19th century Irish society, a society still haunted by famine, shaped by colonialism, and alive with the presence of the supernatural. To understand Bridget Cleary's death, we have to step into her world. Bridget Boland was born in 1869 near Ballyvadlia, a small village in County Tipperary. By all accounts, she was striking, self-possessed, and ambitious. Bridget earned her own income by keeping hens, selling eggs, and working as a dressmaker. She owned a Singer sewing machine, an expensive item that symbolized modernity and independence. This was unusual in a rural, patriarchal society where a husband typically controlled a wife's earnings and movements. She married Michael Cleary in 1887, a cooper by trade. He was proud of his wife's accomplishments but may also have been threatened by them. Several historians, including Angela Burke in her seminal work, The Burning of Bridget Cleary, suggest that Bridget's economic and personal autonomy may have caused friction in the marriage. To fully appreciate what happened next, we must remember that rural Ireland in the 1890s still lived in close conversation with the supernatural. Even as railways connected the countryside to Dublin, fairy lore remained a powerful part of everyday life. The fairies, or Aishí in Irish, were not the gentle, playful creatures of Victorian fairy tales, but a capricious, sometimes dangerous presence. Among the most feared of fairy phenomena was the idea of the changeling. It was widely believed that fairies could abduct a healthy human, often a young woman or child, and leave a sickly, bewitched substitute in their place. Stories of changelings appear in folklore collections throughout Europe, but in Ireland, the belief retained particular potency, even into the late 19th century. Angela Burke notes that changeling narratives often emerged in times of illness, sudden personality change, or marital strife. In such cases, a community might attempt rituals to drive out the supposed fairy, burning herbs, chanting prayers, or threatening the changeling with fire. The fairy double would flee and the real person would return. In March 1895, Bridget fell ill with what was likely bronchitis. After spending several days bedridden, her neighbours began to whisper that she had been taken. Jack Dunn, her cousin, reportedly remarked that Bridget was too fine and modern for her surroundings and that the fairies might have claimed her. Michael Cleary seemed to seize on this idea. Testimony from the later trial indicates that he began to insist Bridget was not the real Bridget. He summoned a local fairy doctor, Dennis Gainey, who prescribed a herbal remedy, a mixture of herbs boiled in milk. Over several days, Michael and Bridget's relatives forced her to swallow the bitter concoction, sometimes holding her down while they did so. Michael also subjected Bridget to verbal interrogations. Witnesses testified that he repeatedly asked her, "Are you Bridget Boland, wife of Michael Cleary, in the name of God?" When she failed to respond strongly enough, Michael took this as proof that the woman before him was a changeling. On the night of March 15th, the situation came to a head. Several neighbours were present in the Cleary cottage. Michael ordered Bridget to eat 3 pieces of bread and jam, declaring that if she refused, she was a fairy. Bridget complied, but Michael was not satisfied, dragging her towards the hearth. He demanded that she come home and reveal herself. What happened next is one of the most disturbing acts of domestic violence in Irish history. Bridget's clothes caught fire and she was fatally burned. Michael reportedly cried out that he had burned the witch, but insisted he would get his real wife back from the fairies at the ring fort. Bridget's charred remains were later found buried in a shallow grave. The murder shocked the British and Irish public. The authorities arrested Michael Cleary and 9 others, including neighbours and relatives who had been present during the rituals. The trial took place in Clonmel in July 1895 and became a media spectacle. The prosecution argued that Michael had killed his wife under the delusion that she was a changeling. The defense, meanwhile, portrayed him as a man acting under extreme emotional strain, supported by community traditions. Michael was convicted of manslaughter and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Other participants received lesser sentences for wounding or for being accessories. The British press seized on the case as evidence of Irish backwardness, a narrative that served colonial interests by portraying Ireland as a place still mired in medieval superstition. The Times of London wrote that the case reads like a page from some witchcraft trial of the 17th century. But was this truly crime motivated by superstition alone? Many historians argue that to accept this explanation is to take Michael Cleary's defence at face value. Angela Burke and gender historians like Margaret Kelleher argue that Bridget's murder must be understood in the context of patriarchy and domestic power. Bridget's independence, her earnings, her fashionable dress challenged the norms of rural Irish womanhood. Michael Cleary's use of fairy lore may have been less about sincere belief and more about reasserting control. The Changeling narrative gave him a culturally legitimate script for coercion. He could present his actions not as spousal abuse, but as a heroic struggle to recover his real wife. The participation of neighbours also complicates the story. Far from being a private act of domestic violence, the setting was public and ritualised. Several witnesses helped restrain Bridget or prepare the herbal cure. This communal involvement suggests that the act was socially intelligible, even if it crossed the line into lethal violence. Folklore here functions as both weapon and alibi. It provided Michael Cleary with a rationale for punishing Bridget, and it allowed neighbours to stand by without intervening. The ritual was framed as an attempt to save Bridget, not harm her. But the result was the silencing of a woman whose independence had unsettled her community. In this sense, Bridget's death can be read not just as a relic of superstition, but as an extreme enforcement of social conformity. By killing the Changeling, Michael Cleary symbolically destroyed the transgressive, independent version of his wife and sought to restore the obedient spouse he expected. Though Bridget Cleary's death occurred over a century ago, its logic is not confined to the past. Around the world today, gender-based violence continues to claim the lives of women accused of bringing shame upon their families or communities. Like the Cleary case, this is often justified within cultural or moral frameworks that present violence as a means of restoring social balance. In each collective belief, whether in fairies or family integrity, it becomes a mechanism for legitimizing control. The persistence of such patterns underscores that while the symbols may change, the underlying social dynamics of fear, jealousy, and power remain disturbingly familiar. Bridget Cleary's murder remains a potent story because it resists simple categorization. It was at once a crime of passion, a folkloric drama, and a public spectacle. It exposes how deeply belief systems can shape behavior and how they can be mobilized to justify violence. Her case also invites reflection on how narratives are used to control memory. Calling her the last witch burned in Ireland turns her into a symbol of superstition, but it risks erasing the gendered violence at the heart of the story. Bridget Cleary was not executed by the state as a witch. She was murdered by her husband in an act of domestic terror. Superstition provided the language and rituals through which Michael Cleary expressed his suspicion and anger, but patriarchal anxiety likely supplied the emotional fuel. The tragedy demonstrates how folklore can serve as a cultural tool, one that can either comfort communities or legitimize violence. Bridget Cleary's story is not just about Ireland's past. It is a cautionary tale about the power of belief, the dangers of unchecked authority, and the vulnerability of those who dare to step outside the role society has assigned them.